Hi everyone, this is Nancy Clark. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar on authentic leadership. Today you're going to be learning about how to build leaders from the inside out and strengthening your leadership skills in all facets of your life. Just a couple little housekeeping items. If you see the chat box at the bottom of your screen, please type any questions that you have during the course of the webinar there, and they will be addressed at the end. And if you have any trouble hearing the webinar, you can go up to the meeting tab in the top and do a sound check on your computer, and that should fix any issues that you might have. Our speaker today is Greg Giesen. He's the Manager of People Development here at the University of Denver. Here he provides an array of professional development services for faculty and staff. With a master's degree in personal services and counseling from Miami University, Greg brings over 25 years of experience in corporate consulting, training, facilitation, and conflict mediation. In addition, Greg is also an adjunct graduate professor at DU's University College and is the author of 3 books on creating authenticity, including his latest, Mondays at 3, A Story for Managers Learning to Lead. Greg also speaks around the country on authentic leadership in his award-winning program, Leading from Within. Additional information about Greg can be found on his website listed below or on his LinkedIn. So without further ado, I'd like to officially welcome Greg Giesen.
Thank you, Nancy. Can you hear me okay? It's great to be here on this beautiful beautiful sunny spring afternoon at the University of Denver campus. Let me begin with just kind of giving an overview of what I'm going to talk about, and then we'll kind of get into the meat. Today I'm going to share with you some of the key ingredients to becoming an effective leader in the workplace. More importantly, these same ingredients will make you an effective leader in your life. Why does that matter, you ask? Because the two are directly related. Why should you listen? Because you owe it to yourself and to all the people in your life that you impact, that's why. In fact, the better question is, why wouldn't you listen? And what makes me qualified to present this material? Aside from the fact that I've been presenting the Leading from Within experience for over 18 years to companies in every industry across the country, and have been teaching leadership on college campuses for just as long, probably the biggest qualifier for me is that I'm the guy who gets called when things break down. And through that experience of trying to fix a team, fix a department, fix a manager, fix a leader, I've witnessed what I believe to be the core problem over and over again. And that's people who are missing the most significant component of leadership, in my opinion, which is they don't know themselves. They haven't done the work. What do I mean, you ask? Well, keep listening and I'll definitely tell you. But what if you're not a leader per se or in a position of leadership? Should you still listen? Definitely, everybody needs to hear this message because really the gist of it is leadership is a way of being. And that's really what we're going to talk about. Now, I should mention that today's program is only an excerpt from the 3-day version of the Leading from Within program that I normally do. There is also a 1-day mini version, which ironically is going to be available here at DU through the Center for Professional Development, which I believe most of you have already received a flyer for. So that's on June 25th. So just so you know kind of where we're at. So let's get started. Now, regardless whether you are a basketball fan or not, let's say that you are a basketball coach and you decide to call a timeout. What are all the possible reasons during a game to call a timeout? Think about that for a second, and let me just say what I think most of you are thinking. Well, it could be to draw up a new play. It could be to take a breather. It could be to change players. It could be to disrupt the momentum of the other team, or it could be to provide a much needed pep talk. That timeout is exactly what the Leading from Within program is all about. It's where you get to take a timeout in your life and step back, examine your life, look at what's working and what's not, make whatever adjustments you need to make, and define or redefine who you are in a supportive environment at an outdoor classroom near you. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about this program because the content today is directly tied into this program, which is what I typically do. If, like a best case scenario, I'll bring a group out to what's called the North Fork Ranch in Bailey, Colorado. It's one of my favorite spots to do this program, and actually that picture that you're looking at is from the North Fork Ranch. And doesn't it look relaxing just looking at it? But here's the beauty of that scenario is your cell phones don't work there. Not only that, there's no TVs and there's no radio. And, typically it's a 3-day program, right? So people get there and they immediately struggle with this detachment issue from, all the electronics that they're used to, feeding them information. And it's kind of fun to watch in a way because I know what's going to happen in the next 3 days. And over time, people start to relax, let go of this connection to the outdoor world and become present. And what actually happens during these 3 days, in addition to the program, is they actually introduce themselves to themselves because they're present with themselves in such a significant way. And that is a critical piece of this because I strongly believe that the answers you seek never come when the mind is busy. They come when the mind is still. And if you're going to do a true self-evaluation about your place in the world and where you are and what's working, what's not, you need to be with yourself without distractions. And that's when you can do your best work. To be honest with you, the environment and the fact of making time to be in the environment are just as important as the work itself, because those combined create this powerful space. And the problem is that rarely do we take the time to do some serious reflection on our lives. It always sounds good. Every New Year's resolution probably has that in there, and yet for some reason we never get to it. Something's always more important, and it just doesn't occur. And so part of what this program is about is you've got to have that kind of space in order to do the kind of work that I'm going to ask people to do. Now, I do my own version of this every year, and this is what I do. Because the Leading from Within program kind of gives you the framework. So then I've taken my own version of it. And what I do is every summer, I go to Boulder, Colorado, and there's a place called Chautauqua Park. And it's a beautiful little community where you can rent these little houses. Houses don't have TVs or radios. They've all got front and back porches, and I don't know if you've ever watched Mayberry, reruns from back in the 60s, but it's kind of got that feel. And people just walk by. There's not a lot of cars. And, you can walk into town. You can get Wi-Fi if you want. But it's such a relaxing environment that's where I go, and I go for 3 days. And I just kind of want to tell you what I do, because this is going to, again, tied into creating the space to do the work, is before I go, and I'm about to go in 2 months from now, so I do it at the end of June every year, is I write about 10 thought-provoking questions, and that becomes the agenda. Half of those are about my work life, and half of them are about my personal life. Whatever they are, questions, and the only objective I have during those 3 days, of course, to relax and hike and go in the town and just do whatever, sit on the porch, is to answer those 10 questions. And I will tell you that I've been doing this for about 7 or 8 years, and I've had major breakthroughs, the last 4 in particular. And one of them has led me to taking this job at the University of Denver, which I didn't even know existed when I went on my retreat. But because I had my own consulting company for about 16 years, I got to a point in my life where I decided I was tired of being a one-man entity, and I wanted to be part of a community. I wanted to see the results of my work, and I wanted to have colleagues and, be part of a bigger picture, and I didn't know what that would look like. But that's what came out of that retreat. And no sooner than I left that I got a request to do some consulting at the University of Denver, where, of course, I've been teaching anyways as an adjunct. But, that's kind of a different world than being on the faculty and staff full time. And one thing led to another, and all of a sudden the position opened up, and it was exactly what I always wanted. And that's just an example. And I'm not saying the retreat caused that, but the retreat created the space for me to come to that conclusion. And then I was able to kind of manifest it and make it happen. So that's the significance. And one last thing I want to mention about this. Well, maybe a couple things. One is I am going to write another book, and the book's going to be called The Solo Retreat, an Annual Process for Self-Reflection and Rejuvenation, because I want to actually describe this whole process in a kind of like a workbook where people can actually use it themselves. And the other thing I want to mention is the importance of the solo time. It's not the same thing to go on a family trip and then send the spouse and the kids down the beach so you have 15 minutes to reflect. That's not going to do it. What I'm talking about is solo time, almost to the point where you get uncomfortable being alone, because that's when the breakthroughs occur. That's when you really start to do the deeper self-reflection. So you can do family trips, but you really need to separate out the solo time so it's significant. And that's the environment that then takes place in the pieces that we're going to talk about next. And here's the premise of the program, which is leading from within means leading with a sense of purpose. I mean, what's your purpose? And passion. Passion around the purpose. If you kind of think you know what you're here for, what you're trying to get, what legacy you want to leave when you're gone, my question would be, do you feel passion around it? Because if you don't feel passion around it, if you don't get goosebumps when you start trying to decide what your purpose is, I can tell you right now it's not the right purpose. That it needs to be tweaked or worked on a little bit more, because those two are interchangeable. And then if we go back to the definition, guided by core values. Core values are really how you live your life. It's what people see. Those have to be in alignment with your purpose and your passion. This is the work I'm talking about, that transcend into all facets of your life, so that what people see on the outside is a reflection of who you are on the inside. There's a congruency between the inside and the outside. What you see is what you get. And the beauty of getting to that place is you never have to remember who you are. You can just be. But if you don't know who you are, then it's very difficult to just be, because there's no foundation, no map to go by. So that's the definition of leading from within. Another term for that is authentic leadership. Now, what it requires is, first off, knowing yourself. And I mean knowing yourself inside and out. What matters to you, what you care about, what makes you cry, what makes you laugh, what gives you chills, what difference you want to make in the world, those kind of things. Knowing yourself at that level, being comfortable with yourself. And that's all the positive and negative experiences throughout your whole life, embracing them all, because that's become who you are today, and just accepting and bringing it all in together and being comfortable with yourself and in the presence of others. And the last one would be being able to define yourself in word and deed. And here's what I mean by that. Basically, what you say and what you do are in alignment with who you are. And so that creates that level of consistency. And I want to tell you a college story which kind of explains why this is important. And this was my college story. So I went to, at the time it was called Western State College in Gunnison, and they've changed their name. But I was the kind of high school student that I was a follower. I just went where everybody else went. I just did what everybody else wanted to do. I had no ambition. I was just going to go with the crowd. And you know what? That was very comfortable to me. And, you know, I was probably a C plus student. Who knows? I don't have a whole lot of memories other than I played soccer and had my core group of friends. And turns out most of them who were on the soccer team went to Western State College. So I just followed along. Why should I change anything else? And I had 3 goals when I went to college. And this kind of gives you a sense of who I was at the time. One was to meet women. Second one was to drink beer. And the third one was play soccer. And I can tell you right now that I was successful in 2 out of 3 of those. I'm kidding, actually. But that was all I knew, and that was all I cared about. And my first 2 years of college were really just playing soccer and following the crowd, hanging out with my friends. In fact, this would be a typical evening in freshman and sophomore year. And this will kind of age me too, but we would end up in some guy's dorm room. We'd be drinking beer, eating Ritz crackers, and watching Johnny Carson. That was like my evening for 2 years. And somehow I managed to graduate with a 2.0, not graduate, I mean end with a 2.0 GPA at the end of my sophomore year. And that was who I was. And then this thing happened, and it's called a defining moment. And when we do the full-length program, we actually spend a whole evening on defining moments, because I think that they're very telling. And when I say defining moment, it could be a positive or a negative experience, but something that created such an impact that it shaped who we've become. So here it is, really about this time in that sophomore year in the spring, about not graduate, but about to finish the school year. And one day, the captains of the women's soccer team approached me. And I remember right offhand that seemed weird anyways. I mean, I was a good soccer player, but I wasn't by far the best. So why are they coming to see me? They came to my little apartment, and they said, Greg, we would like you to be our head coach next year. And I remember I was in such denial, and I was so embarrassed. I just laughed and said, yeah, right. And I looked behind me to see if it was a practical joke and somebody would pop out of the bushes, or, you know, and I wanted to apologize. I'm like, well, what about Alan? What about Dave? What about those guys? You know, I didn't want to step up. And they're like, Greg, we want you to be our head coach. Will you do that, or will you think about it? And I said, sure. And I said, sure, just so that they would leave, you know, because I was so embarrassed. And I could not equate why they picked me. And I remember this moment like it was yesterday. So that night, I'm in the shower, and the water's pouring on my face. And these words popped out of my mouth, which were, what do they see in me that I don't? And that ended up becoming a defining moment, because it put me in a place of where it took somebody else to see leadership abilities in me, because I wasn't willing to even look to see if I had them. And so as a result of that moment, I started to entertain the idea. And over the summer, you know, it kind of grew on me. And then I got excited about it. And now I want to tell you briefly what my last 2 years of college were like, because that was kind of the springboard. So I did become the women's soccer coach. And I became the men's soccer coach, because it just seemed just as easy to just go on the other side of the field and, you know, do the same thing. So I became the men's and women's soccer coach, which led to a series of other things. I became a writer for the college newspaper. I started a psychology and sociology club. I was a peer advisor for new freshmen. And then my senior year, I decided to run for student body president and I won. And during those 2 years, with all that activity, I never had time to study. Keep in mind, I was a 2.0 GPA. I never had time to study, but something was different. Instead of looking for the easy professors or I don't want a class on Friday, or I want to sleep in on Thursdays, or I want to go skiing I was looking for who's the best teachers, who could teach me the most in this area, who could do this, who could do that. Like something had shifted, and here was my GPA when I graduated. And you can do the math. I graduated with a 2.95. So think about that. I had a 2.0 after my sophomore year, 2.95 I graduated. What did that mean for my grades the last 2 years? And of course the answer is they were all A's and 1 B. And so my question to you is, how do you explain that? Same person, same environment, same school, and yet complete turnaround. And of course, part of the answer is, well, I found myself, or I had passion, or I had a vision of who I could become, or I started to believe in myself. All those things are true. And what I would say is, if I was going to sum that up, it's the difference between content and context. You see, content is all around us. It's taking classes for the sake of taking classes. It's doing our work in the workplace because that's what we're supposed to do. It's following a path. It's doing things. It's adding things. It's showing up and doing whatever it is that we're supposed to do. But you know what? It has absolutely zero meaning if there's not a context in place to fit it in. The context at Western State College for me was, I am a leader. I can be a leader. I can make a difference. I can have an impact on people, and I want to drive my career. I don't want the career to drive me. And that's what came through that, and that created the context. Therefore, the content of taking the classes and all the things that I was normally doing had a totally different perspective to me, because it was coming from a different place. And that's the importance of having a context. So when I talk about leading from within, it can't happen without a context, because there's got to be a deeper purpose. And that's why the solo retreat, or spending time with yourself, getting to know yourself so that you know yourself, you're comfortable with yourself, it takes that to be able to define yourself through words and deed. So if you were in class here with me, or if you're listening to this as a recording, what I would encourage you to do is to stop the tape and answer this one question. And those of you that are listening live, you can come back to this. But it's really the first exercise, which is share a significant defining moment in your life and the impact it's had on you. See, those are the kind of questions I'm talking about for self-reflection, where you've got to really step back and do some thinking. Because what I want to know is, what did you do with it? How did you turn it into something, and has it become part of your context for living? All right, so you can come back to that. So what I want to talk about now in this program, there's 3 keys to authentic leadership. Now today we're just going to talk really about this first one, and before we end, I'll let you know what the next 2 are. But really, you've got to come to the program to get the whole thing. But let's talk about this first one, because it does set the stage, and that is, we are here for a purpose. And we've already talked about this a little bit. When we are clear on what our purpose is, and I'm talking about being able to put it into 1 sentence, 2 at the most, getting that compacted. And I'm talking about our purpose in life. All right, so when we are clear on what our purpose is, we then have a context, right? Remember the context, because purpose creates the context for living a purposeful and meaningful life. So purpose and context are interrelated. That's why that's important. When we have a context for living a purposeful life, we then can clarify on a day-to-day basis what we need to do to stay on purpose. In other words, we can define what that looks like from a behavioral standpoint. And then when we're able to define what it looks like, to clarify it, then and only then can we assess whether we're living on purpose or not. And if you go in reverse, you can't assess whether you're living on purpose if you haven't clarified what living on purpose looks like on a day-to-day basis with all the different relationships and entities that we're involved in. And you can't clarify if you don't have a context, the bigger umbrella in which to even start from. So that's the work I'm talking about that leaders aren't doing. They'll do it for an organization, but they won't do it for themselves. And yet I would say it makes a world of difference. Let me give you an example. And not to pick on the the small rural towns, but let's just say a tornado hits a small rural town. And state the obvious, what structures are probably going to be most impacted? Of course, you're saying probably it's the mobile home communities, right? And the reason would be because that's true. And why? And of course, the answer is because they don't have a foundation, right? They're on top of the ground. They're not attached. But here's the weird thing. So when a tornado comes through those towns, those mobile parks, they just go flying everywhere. And yet right next to the mobile park community is an actual housing community that experienced damage to the houses, but the foundations are still intact. And so they're repairing where the mobile home is completely replacing. And what I would say is people are exactly the same way. That when you have, and we're going to talk about the foundation piece, when you have a foundation, and the foundation is your purpose, when you have a foundation, the tornadoes in life, which are the crisis, the bad times, the challenging times, they either knock you over completely or they just put slight damage and you recover very quickly. And the difference between the two is somebody that has a foundation, that's coming from a foundation, versus somebody that's not. And that's why it is so important. Now here's another exercise that if you're listening to this on the recording, you can do, and then come back to the recording. And if you're listening to it live, come back to it anyways. So what I want you to do is to stand and just hear it out and then try it afterwards. I want you to stand, face a wall right now and look at that wall. Point your arm at the wall with your finger pointed at a particular spot on the wall. And now let's say you're using your right arm, okay? So you go to the right, keep your body the same way, and go as far as you can with your right hand and your finger and mark the wall, okay? So do that, and then you kind of have a bearing. That's like step one. Now I'm going to have you do two different things. We're going to do the exact same exercise, but I'm going to change two things. First thing, I want you to take full breaths. I'm talking about breathing all the way down to your belly. Full breaths continuously, nice and slow. Full breaths. See, what happens is in a typical day, we stop taking full breaths. We take short breaths just halfway through our chest. And as a result, what happens is we regurgitate the same air. And it's why you get tired, because your blood doesn't get oxygenized and all those kind of things. That's why we need to go on walks and stand up and move around. It's really from the breathing and the oxygenation of our blood. So this time, you're standing, you're looking at the wall, you got your finger pointed, and I want you to take full breaths. And then the second thing I want you to do is slightly bend your knees, almost like a bounce, like you can bounce. Have your knees bent, and like you can absorb anything. And picture that your feet are literally a connection to the ground, like the ground and your feet are one and the same. it's cemented together. There's no separation, right? So your feet are solid on the ground, and you got a bend in your knees, and you're taking a full breath. Now point your finger at the wall, and now go to the right, and see how far you get this time. And what 99.9% of you are going to discover is that you went a lot farther the second time. And I would argue, how do you explain that? Because same person, same wall, same activity, you did the same motion, and you went farther the second time. Well, of course, what you did was you centered yourself. You relaxed, you breathed, and you got reconnected with yourself. And by being able to bend, you kind of found center in your body, and you were able to go farther. Well, that bending and center in your body is the same thing as having a foundation. Whereas you can dance with the challenges of life instead of get bowled over by them. Because it doesn't knock you over. You just move slightly to the left, slightly to the right. It is almost like you're dancing. It's kind of the whole martial arts philosophy of, before people do any martial arts, they get centered so that their body is completely flexible. And what's happening is they're at this powerful foundation that evolves of being centered. That's the significance of this. When you have a defined purpose, that creates the foundation, that creates the center. It grounds us, it creates consistency, and it gives us focus. Because no matter what you're doing in your life, the essence of who you are is always with you, and nothing will ever change that. The problem is, if you don't do that kind of work, then there's no internal that becomes part of the external. Instead, what happens is you get defined by the external world. People define you, expectations define you, crises define you, and there's no foundation for you to be able to have all that center around, and as a result, you become those external components, and you become uncentered. And as a result, you're only as good as the next crisis or the next situation or the next experience, and the external world defines who you are, instead of you defining who you are and then showing up in the external world. And I don't know if you see the difference, but I'm telling you, it is night and day. And that's what I'm talking about as part of the key ingredient to leadership, because it impacts all the roles you play. So I want to tell you a story just to kind of drive this home, and then we'll kind of look at some of the other components and wrap it up. I did an Outward Bound experience where it was a 10-day Outward Bound experience where we were going to be out in the wilderness for 10 days with a group of people. I didn't know any of them. There were 9 others, so there were 10 of us in total. It was out in Colorado. And, in the first 2 days of this experience, we're at a camp. We were doing team building and really bonding as a group because we needed to be a team, right, to go out into the wilderness together for 8 days. And so we did that, and it was just a powerful experience. And needless to say, there were a lot of relationship challenges and things like that. But for the most part, we pulled it together. So here we are on day 8 of 10, and we're going to climb Mount Massive. Mount Massive is the second highest peak in Colorado. And it's a 9-hour, on a good day, going and coming back. So we had to block out 9 hours. So we started early. And I might add that the 9 other people in my group were not from Colorado. So I've climbed maybe, 5 14ers before, nothing significant, but it wasn't like a real novel thing, but I wanted to do it just because with this group, it would be a different experience. But the other 9 weren't from Colorado, and for them, climbing a 14er was a big deal. It would give them bragging rights when they go home after the program, and so it meant a lot. And so here we were, probably about 3:30 in the morning. We've got these little flashlights on our helmets, and we're heading out. And everything's going great, and the sun's slowly starting to rise, and it's just very beautiful. And then all of a sudden, Valerie, one of the women, tripped over a rock and sprained her ankle. Now, immediately, we all came running, but I could see in the eyes of everybody, half of them were coming from, "Are you okay, Valerie?" The other half were, "Oh crap, I'm not going to summit." Fear, like, uh-oh, this is not good. And it got worse, because what happened was, well, at first we're like, "Valerie, are you okay? Okay," because it's still early, and she's like, "No, we'll do it. I'll do it. I can do this," because she's a real trooper. So she gets up, she's limping, pretty bad, but she's going, and so we're trying it. But the problem is now all of a sudden we're really slow, and there kept developing a gap between whoever was in front of Valerie, and in Outward Bound, the whole, you have to stay together, and so we had to keep waiting, and it was getting a little frustrating. And so one of the guys, who's kind of struggled the whole week with different people, and not to throw my own opinion in, but he was more about himself than he was about the group anyways, he got extremely frustrated, because if you did the math, at this rate, we were not going to summit. And he was so upset that he couldn't talk to the group. He just took off on his own, like parallel. Like he went literally maybe 70 yards to the left of us. And what's weird is he stayed at the same pace, but he couldn't hike with us. He had to be by himself. And I'm guessing because he just had a lot of emotions and he just didn't want to, he was trying to work through them. I don't know what was going on. Now, if you know Outward Bound, that he already violated the policy, because you're supposed to always be together. But the instructors were going to let this play out. They thought this would be a good learning opportunity for us after the fact. So they were going to let it play out. So now we're going another hour and a half. And it's just not working. And finally, he comes over, and you could tell he was upset. And he started screaming. And we were kind of shocked at first, because, I don't know, it just seemed inappropriate. And he's looking at Valerie. He's like, "What do I need to do to get you on top of that mountain?" And all of a sudden, if she wasn't self-conscious about her ankle before that, she certainly was now, because now Valerie was the problem. At least he had made it that way. It was no longer a team thing. We were factioned. And so people started arguing back and forth. And as you can imagine, some of the arguments were, if we're a team, we either rise together, we go down together. But then there were other arguments that were like, well, what if we break into two groups? Half the group goes back down with Valerie. The other half continues on, so some people can still summit. There was all that kind of discussion. Now, I'm going to show you the next slide, because this is what we didn't realize we were doing at the time. Was we were arguing in a half circle. Like we had formed a half circle, and we were seated, and we happened to be looking down the mountain, like where we had come from. I'm sorry, hold on. Okay, the computer got stuck. All right, so this was the view, but we were looking down, right? And so the whole argument was blame, pointing fingers, who's right, who's wrong. This is what was happening. Now, all of a sudden, the instructors are watching this, and the main instructor comes over to us, and he says, "Okay, time out. He goes, "You guys, this is an important conversation, and I want you to have it, and I want you to complete it." He goes, "But could you do me a favor? Could we just move it, a few hundred yards over to the left?" And I remember thinking at the time, I was annoyed. Like, What? When you're in a good argument, you don't want to stop. And I was like, whatever. In fact, we were so dysfunctional at this point that when we got up, started following him, we continued to argue as we're walking. I don't think anybody even noticed where we were going because that's how focused we were. And then he put us in this other place, and we got in the exact same half circle and just continued. But this is what we were looking at. Instead of where we came from, we were looking at where we were headed. He's like, okay, go on. And then he left. I might add, that was the only facilitation he did. Didn't say a thing about us or our dynamics. He just moved us and left. Well, as you can imagine, now we're trying to argue and yet look at this at the same time. And I literally was drooling as we were seated there because he knew that right around the corner was a view of where we were headed. And you know how it can be, you guys remember when you were in Colorado, how deceptive it can be in the mountains. Like when I look at that picture, I was thinking, I could jog up there in 45 minutes. Little did I realize that's probably about 3 to 4 hours, but it looks so close. I could smell it, I could touch it, I could feel it. I was on that mountain, and everybody else, none of us talked to each other about that. But what did happen was the nature of the conversation shifted. Subliminally, because I didn't notice any of this until well after the fact. That instead of focusing on who's right or who's wrong or blaming or factioning off into groups, we all just looked and said, what do we, that's the first time we used we in a while, what do we need to do to make it to the top of that mountain as a group? And all of a sudden, the brainstorming shifted. Well, what if we did this? Well, what if we took all of Valerie's equipment? What if we put her at the front of the line so that there was never a gap? What if we, and if Valerie gets to a point where she can't do it, we're going back. And we just united around that. And the point of this story is, oh, by the way, we summited at 1 o'clock. The storms came about 1:07. You can actually see them in our group photo. And it was a massive storm, but we did it. We beat it, and it became a very, very powerful story. And you know where I'm going with this. That is what a purpose is. That's what a vision is knowing who you are and being able to resonate so much with it that you feel passionate about it, that it shows up in your values, that you can see it, smell it, touch it, that it is the essence of who you are, and it's as strong as that mountaintop. And that no matter what kind of weather, which metaphorically represents the challenges in our lives, come our way, that nothing is going to get in the way of that. Yeah, there might be slight damage, but you know what? When you've got that core foundation, nothing matters because you get to just show up as that person. And that affects everything you do, all your relationships. And when you talk about leadership in the workplace, it needs to start after this piece is defined if it's going to really work. Otherwise, what happens is there's no context for how you're showing up in the workplace or how you're leading others, and instead it's all content. So whatever the latest book you read, whatever you're biased, or the supervisor before you managed, you're just doing whatever they did because you don't have that core foundation. So that's really the first key to an authentic leadership presence. The second one, and we won't go into these, but is that we are all leaders. And wherever you go, it's not about position or title or those kind of things. And the third one is that authentic leaders lead from within. And so in the one-day workshop, we get into much more depth with each of those two pieces. And I just want to say some closing remarks about the actual workshop, be it the one-day version that we're doing here at DU or the 3-day version, which is, as you can imagine, we use the outdoor classroom at least half the time, because a lot of the work is self-reflection in a supportive group. So it's a very powerful team building for intact teams because you're there to support each other and to watch each other grow. And it's just this powerful connection when you walk out of there with the group. And it gives you a framework for what to do when you create your own version of this on a yearly basis, which is what I would strongly encourage you do, and which is what my book will be about and why that matters. The other thing about when I've done this program is, especially the 3-day version, is nobody wants to leave at the end of the third day because they've rediscovered who they are and they're so grounded in themselves that they know the minute they get in the car and head back to TV, to text messages, to emails, that they're going to be pulled away. And that's really where the challenge begins. Are you more of in the trailer park where you're surface level leadership, or are you more grounded? And that will determine your success. So the benefits of taking the Leading from Within program is you get to reintroduce yourself to you. You get to create or enhance the foundation, and you'll be at peace within yourself. And that will impact personally and professional sides. So that's the essence of leadership and why it's so important. And that's, well, I forgot to mention, this would be my purpose statement. Remember I said it's important for it to be a sentence. And I'll just read it real quick. I am a passionate and caring man, committed to living, loving, laughing, and learning, and helping others do the same. And there's a whole story behind how I found that, but even as I just read it to you, I got goosebumps. That tells you that it still works for me. And as you can see, the second one is we are all leaders. Third one is authentic leaders lead from within. And this is a quote that my mother lived by, who recently passed, but it's really, she was about as authentic as she could get at the end. And you've seen this before in some cases, but life should not be a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in an attractive and well-preserved body, but rather to skid in sideways, wine in one hand, chocolate in the other, body thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and screaming, wow, what a ride. And that's what happens when you found that authentic self, that foundation, is life looks different completely.
All right, thank you so much, Greg. If anybody has any questions, feel free to go ahead and type them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we can take a few minutes to have Greg answer them. And if you don't have any questions right now or have any questions after listening to a recording of this webinar, please feel free to follow up with me directly, and I can pass on any questions to Greg and put you guys in touch if you have anything. And it doesn't look like we have any questions coming in. So I'm going to go ahead and just give one last reminder that if you are interested in attending the workshop on Saturday, June 25th, the Leading Within workshop, it's from 9 to 4 that day. I'll attach a flyer on that when I send out this recorded webinar, but we'd love to have any of you join us that day. And thank you so much, and hope you all enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.